Good evening, everyone. My name is John Seck, and I have the pleasure of serving as the 18th president of Carroll College, and it's my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce a gentleman who wrote a book about a man who was the 8th president of Carroll College, but that's not what the book is about. But it's a great honor to be here tonight as I have the honor and privilege of walking in the footsteps of Archbishop Hunthausen as the president of this institution. And before I move forward with my formal introduction, I just want to give a shout out and thanks to the Hunthausen family and extended family who are with us tonight and for their incredible support of this institution. In fact, we have a young man at this institution this year, Ray Shipman, who is the 67th Hunthausen to enroll at Carroll College. I think that's worth a round of applause. And also Andy Hunthausen, after I was named president-elect at the end of February, and Andy on a snowy day called me and said, "What are you doing this afternoon? Do you have a little time to go for a ride with me?" And I did, and we spent over an hour with the Archbishop and with his brothers, and that was an incredibly memorable moment to just spend some time talking with him. But for me, what was the most moving moment was when he asked if he could provide a blessing as the new president, and that was something I wish I had a video recorder on, but I shall never forget it. So thank you, Andy. So again, thank you for attending tonight's presentation on A Disarming Spirit, the life of Archbishop Raymond Hunthausen, written by Dr. Frank Fromherz. And it's been a wonderful opportunity for me to get to know you and meet you this evening. From 2008 to 2018, Dr. Fromherz taught classes on the sociology of peace, war, and religion at Portland State University. He also taught classes on community organizing and American society at Western Oregon University. He has published multiple essays and articles on subjects like the role of religion in public life, social and economic justice, and Christianity in Central America, and he began his higher education career teaching philosophy and humanities at Mount Angel Abbey in Oregon. Dr. Fromherz was born and raised in Oregon and received his doctorate in religion and social ethics from the Graduate Theological Union at Berkeley, California. His book on Archbishop Hunthausen was published March 3rd by Sahai Publishers, Loyola Marymount University, and it opens with the Archbishop's historic speech denouncing the Trident nuclear submarine fleet harboring in his archdiocese and traces the religious and social issues shaped by his tenure as Archbishop of Seattle. And I might mention that during the time I spent with the Archbishop that Andy arranged, we had a conversation about that. And it was very, very powerful for me to hear from the Archbishop in his own words about those very days. This book focuses on three major themes: conscience, courage, and character. It outlines the history of the Archbishop's life and highlights his commitment to spirituality, peace, and justice. We are fortunate to have Dr. Fromherz here to discuss the book and the Archbishop's life and work, along with a panel of distinguished guests and members of the Archbishop's family. And Sarah Walsh is the Vice Chair of the Board of Trustees of this great college. Thank you again for bringing your work to our community. We so appreciate it, and I'm very much looking forward to the conversation this evening. Thank you.
Good evening. How you doing?
Good.
All right. Thank you, President Seck. Okay, John, you all can just call me Frank, and I hope to get to know you. Met many of you, some of you I got to know, especially family members, through working on the book, and that's been a great honor, privilege to meet so many good folks that have known, walked the journey with Raymond Hunthausen. I did want to say, though, that I was feeling a little bit like the competition this evening might be more than I could handle. And I also realized that if Archbishop Hunthausen, Dutch, as so many people know him, I'm going to wager that if he were around this evening, he'd probably be watching the NCAA championship. I certainly know this much. He'd much rather watch that than have himself put up on any sort of a pedestal. That's, of course, who he is. You know that. There's a word that's used in Spanish. My wife, Bridget, who's here with me, the last few days, she's been at the table where we've been selling the books in Missoula, and yesterday evening, great gathering, family and friends at Our Lady of the Valley here in Helena. And Bridget runs a nonprofit in Oregon. Bridget, could you stand up? Oh, come on. So she's the one in the family that allows me to go off and do this sort of thing. She founded and directs last 20 years a nonprofit in Oregon called Adelante Mujeres. We have, that translates as, well, how does that translate, dear?
You can translate it as Women Rise Up or Women Move Forward.
So women rise up or women move forward. Forward women would be the literal translation. Forward, adelante, mujeres, women. It's a Latina empowerment, education, entrepreneurship effort in Washington County, in Western Oregon, where we're from. We're both native Oregonian farm kids. But actually, Dr. Seck, it was necessary for both of us to go to the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley for two Oregon farm kids to meet one another. That's where we met. And I just want to say that that the Spanish language in the world that Bridget works in also ties us to our own children, to my sons from former marriage, Chris and Nick. The front of the book is dedicated to my sons and their wives and our 5 grandchildren who all live in Bolivia. It's a long way. In Spanish, the grandkids are nietos and nietas, and they're pretty special. So we decided to dedicate the book to them. That seems kind of appropriate because, after all, he's not here with us tonight, but one of the Hunthausen Sturgar Walsh family members, actually Sarah's brother, Dick Walsh, Richard, St. Richard, I'm told, because he's such a great, well, many of you know this so much better than I do. There, I see heads nodding because you all know this, but he's really taken the lead for many years in helping to track the history of the family. So, of course, he was a great source for me, yeah, in so many ways, as were many other family members, to get the story, or try to get the story right as best I could. All these good folks here at this table with me participated in sharing stories. There is actually in the back of the book, the very end of the book, there is a Hunthausen Sturgar Walsh family tree that basically is put together by Dick Walsh, not certainly by me. But in Spanish, there's one word I'd like to open my remarks with. It's funny when a person, is already 7 minutes into something and they say they're going to open their remarks. But I did want to give you some idea of who we are that are here before you, myself and Bridget. The word I want to focus on for a moment is the word presente. It's quite easy to remember. It's like the English word present. It's just present with an E on the end of it, presente. But that's a word that was used in Central America during the difficult times of the 1970s and 80s, times when Archbishop Hunthausen was in Seattle And one of the many issues that he addressed, perhaps less known than his rather famous stand, was mentioned at the introduction by President Sek, namely his stand on the Trident submarine program based in his own backyard there on the Hood Canal. And a speech he gave on the 12th of June, 1981, with which we open this book, the first chapter of the section on conscience. He did describe the Trident submarine base Bangor in rather provocative language, sure to capture headlines. Terms such as the Auschwitz of Puget Sound. One of the most fierce critics, and he faced many, many types of backlash for the stands he took on many issues. Issues in society, regarding war and peace. I mentioned just a moment ago Central America. What I have in mind when I think of that word presente in Spanish is the great, late, slain on the 24th of March, 1980, Arzobispo Oscar Romero. It could be said that Romero would have been less likely, I'm not saying it's at all the case that he would not have been assassinated, but he was killed. It is true, it has been shown that some of the people trained at a military base in the United States, then called the School of the Americas, could have been involved in the taking of the life of El Salvador's prophetic Archbishop. In the opening section of this book, we learn that for Raymond Hunthausen, Oscar Romero was a very important influence. I'm sorry, I'm just done. Earlier today, I was with Andy. He set me up for an interview. Thank you, Andy. It was with Brian Kahn. Home Ground was the name of the program. I think it runs on your public radio stations in these parts. Maybe in a few weeks he'll decide to include it, or he might. Yeah, he will? I mean, I don't really have control over that, do I? So, anyway, we had a few tough moments during that interview, and I'm sorry, I would like to be able to be much more composed, but you know, Raymond Hunthausen is one of those people that really gets to you in really profound ways, and that happened to me. But Oscar Romero is definitely, I went to Berkeley to do my doctoral work, and I thought I was going to do a dissertation on Oscar Romero, so that's why I mentioned him. And because, of course, he had a huge influence on Dutch Hunthausen. There's no question about it, as he did on so many people. But when I got to Berkeley in the mid-'80s, I was having a bit of a tough time in my own family. We went through a divorce. The mother of those two sons I mentioned, we were married to Bolivians, actually, again, the family in Bolivia. And they were quite young. It was a tough time, and I picked up a book, and the book was called Habits of the Heart, Individualism and Commitment in American Life. And before you know it, I wanted to study with its lead author, and so I met him. I actually organized one of our many Justice and Peace conferences at Mount Angel. Archbishop Raymond Hunthausen, then sharing the pastoral letter on the economy, came to Mount Angel. He had been former abbot primate of the Benedictines, so it wasn't difficult to get him to come to a Benedictine abbey. And I asked him, I said, who do you think we should invite from the university world? He said, you've got to invite sociologist of religion Robert Bellah from UC Berkeley. And so I did, although I had to call him up and say, look, Archbishop Hunthausen would like you to come to our event, and of course that's why he came. It changed my life because I went to Berkeley and I studied with him. I learned about religion and society. But when I was there, again, I thought I was going to do Oscar Romero for my research. I realized that my own life story was found in the chapters of that book about American society, as indeed have many people said when they opened that book. And I decided I better focus on my own country. and therefore I decided I would study what I believe to be the Oscar Romero of the Pacific Northwest. In some ways, this book began in 1982. That's not a good argument for why it's so long. It's 470 pages, but it has something to do with the length. There's a whole lot more that could be in here. I learned last night a very excellent constructive critique that perhaps I didn't nearly adequately develop the story of the importance of the canon lawyer who was close to Hunthausen here in the Diocese of Helena. Many of you would know that name. Who was it?
Father Jim Provost.
Father Jim Provost. I was actually waiting to make sure I was pronouncing the last name correctly, so Provost. And huge influence, of course, very much a person in the spirit of the Second Vatican Council. You all know this kind of thing. I feel silly, trying to teach you things about Raymond Hunthausen you know better than I do. But of course, he was formed and shaped as a bishop by the Second Vatican Council. First task on the job when he was appointed here, right here in this city. Well, of course, as President John knows so well, the gig he had, down-to-earth language, before the bishop gig was president of this institution. So he goes from Carroll to right over there, the Chancery, right? Where, well, I don't know, it was actually over here at the time. Andy, by the way, taught me a lot of things, took me around, showed me where he lived and where his mother lived there with him in the last years of her life. And I learned about some escapades, Bill and others out there. Yeah? Okay. There's no question that the Second Vatican Council had enormous influence on Raymond Hunthausen, but I would like to say that his concern about issues ranges from profound commitment, which of course through Provost and frankly through his interaction with his sister Edna Hunthausen and many other women religious, and simply with women as well as men who cared about the shared responsibility theme at the heart of the Second Vatican Council. He would already in Seattle had prepared himself, was already there, I can tell, here in Helena, yeah? As I say, I could still continue to do much better work in the book, perhaps in covering that prior period. But clearly on gender equality, on his willingness to open the cathedral at St. James to dignity, to the gay and lesbian community, to respect people, no matter what their backgrounds might be, to never judge people or any category of people, to always reach out and to learn from others, to be a welcoming spirit. Sounds a lot to me like the gospel. That's who he was, as you know. I would like to just go ahead, I guess, tonight, instead of reading from the beginning of the book, which I did yesterday evening, I want to finish my opening remarks, and then we're going to ask this dear panel to share, and then we've got a roving microphone for folks out there. And that, frankly, wish we could move everybody right up here a lot closer, but anyway, okay? So if you've got something you'd like to share, be thinking about that, because we'll have a chance for comments and sharing and questions. Yeah, is that okay, everybody? I feel like a college professor asking that question, but I shouldn't treat it that way. I know you have a lot to share, and I hope you'll feel like you can share that. I'm going to go to chapter 10 of the third part. Chapter 10 is the final chapter of the book, and it starts on, if you have a copy, it starts on page 419. I think, John, your copy's right here, is that right? Did you leave it up here?
I think I left mine on the podium.
Yeah, and I set it off, and
Oh,
look and
great.
see if that's the one.
Thank you.
If it's not, give it to Bridget. Okay. Very good. All right, so chapter 10 is called The Character of Hunthausen's Call. I'd just like to read a little bit from the beginning. I think it gathers a lot of threads of the book, as you would hope it might, since it's near the end of the book. In the late 1980s, tensions between Rome and Seattle were finally subsiding. Yet those tensions still required emotional outlets. One way Dutch dealt with life in rough patches was to look for levity and grace in prayer and in a good story. There was a beautiful large wooden rocker in his Seattle Chancery office, and it was being used to hold some of his documents and papers. That rocking chair was about to cause trouble, and it would make for a droll tale to share during his sunset years. The Dutch was walking toward the rocker to pick up a document, and by misstep, catapulted the top of the chair right smack to his mouth, busting out a tooth. He described it as similar to taking a blow from a boxer. It nearly knocked him out. Coadjutor Archbishop Murphy took him to the emergency room. The doctor wanted to put stitches in, but Dutch asked if there was any alternative. The physician advised that if he could keep his mouth still for a few days, it would probably heal all right. Now, it turns out Dutch had some speaking engagement that evening, so he told Murphy he would have to come with him and take his place at the podium. Murphy, with his Irish wit, told a series of jokes, making it almost impossible for Hunthausen to keep his mouth still. That story, by the way, which is the first of the endnotes of that chapter, every story from every source I cite throughout the book. Incidentally, I see right here John Driscoll. I'd like to recognize John, who's written a book, who did enormously extensive research to try to understand Reagan Presidential Library, right, and many other sources to try to track this whole idea of, was there a kind of a collusion? Is that an interesting word these days? Between the U.S. Government leadership at the time and the Vatican in what would lead to a great deal of repression in the life of Raymond Hunthausen. And John Driscoll did some very extensive research. It's especially cited in the case of this book, John's work, which he's published now in a book. What's the name of the book?
Storm of a Lifetime.
The Storm of a Lifetime. Good book, check it out, The Storm of a Lifetime. The author's right here, John Driscoll. Ask him about it tonight. But in that, I believe it's in chapter 7, yes, chapter 7 of this book, called Paraclete in the Labyrinth, that John's work is an important source. It was Dick Walsh, as you can see in the next paragraph, now back on 419. It was Dick Walsh who related that rocking chair tale. And he attests that for the remainder of his life, his uncle had a retainer. Y'all, I'm looking over to see if Dick was right or wrong. Of course he was right. Had a retainer holding that tooth in place. Humor served him well in those final years in Seattle and afterward, as it always had. This final chapter traces the culmination of Hunthausen's life journey and explores the larger meaning of his life. Raymond Hunthausen's call to his country and church may speak to us now and to future generations. You might ask, why did I write this book? I was motivated because I felt that the life of Raymond Hunthausen was not only something to truly celebrate and to be inspired by, but I really believe that it has enormous implications for major issues we face today and we will face tomorrow. In the Catholic Church, for sure, but also in this society, on a range of issues that he can teach us a great deal about and inspire our work going forward. I'm going to jump down to the bottom of that page. Hunthausen once reflected on the concept of character, page 419, and its relationship to the formation of conscience. And I'm quoting Raymond Hunthausen now. Quote, what needs to be brought out is that each of us has a value system embedded deeply within us. And that is the fruit of a lifetime of living. Experiencing, reacting, reading, worshiping, understanding, judging, deciding. End quote. Next page, 420. His character emerged in a close-knit family, in interpersonal relations with people from many walks of life and worldviews, in the great outdoors of Montana and the Pacific Northwest, and in his Catholic faith in conversation with people of other faith traditions. Quoting him again, in a religious person, that value system and the depth to which it is internalized depends upon the extent to which that person has been immersed in the life and values of his or her religious tradition. Raymond Hunthausen lived out his faith in an ecumenical spirit that was conveyed in the Second Vatican Council's Pastoral Constitution on the Church in the Modern World, Gaudium et Spes. He tried to attune himself to the joys and hopes, as well as to the griefs and the anxieties of the people of this earth, especially the poor or those afflicted in any way. Well, these too would be his joys and hopes, his griefs and anxieties. Those, by the way, are just a paraphrase of the opening lines of that enormously influential pastoral constitution. In keeping with those opening lines of the pastoral constitution, joys and hopes, griefs and anxieties, nothing genuinely human could fail to raise an echo in the heart of Raymond Hunthausen. When he spoke about the influence of a faith tradition on character and conscience, his own story made the words more meaningful. Again, I quote him: "The more a person experiences the values of a tradition by living amidst people who cherish those values, the more a person worships in that tradition, the more a person studies and reflects on the tradition, the more a person tries to live a whole life in obedience to the God that the tradition mediates, the more that person will be marked to the depths of his or her being by the richness of the tradition." End quote. Raymond Hunthausen was empowered by the richness of his Catholic tradition, including the people of God spirit of Vatican II, and he was encumbered by the conduct of some of those in the church who suppressed him, and also by his own, I would argue, by his own internalized oppression, which was linked to his official place in a patriarchal structure. With all of this and its ambiguity, he made his way into a deeply personal call to Christian nonviolence. Nonviolence is a call of conscience, challenging himself, his nation, and his religion, came to the fore during the Seattle years. He made nonviolence into a way of life, with implications for public policy, as earlier chapters have documented, but also for his personal practice. Quote, "Trying to live this way has caused us to become more humble and gentle toward others, more reliant on God and the Spirit for the effects we want to see in ourselves, in others, and in our world. Hopefully we have been becoming more and more what we're trying to create." His path was as much about inner peace as outer peace. By the way, a lot of these quotes, not all, because you have to look at the endnotes to see the sources, but some of these are from personal interviews I had with this dear person. "I'm convinced it is not only what we do, but even more what we and the others we touch become. That will change the world." That is the very definition of nonviolence. We commit ourselves, our best critical and creative powers, our resources and time, to witnessing in behalf of our neighbors, in discipleship, in fellowship with Jesus, who shows us the way. In the end, we are called to lay down our lives for our friends, little by little, until completely. Raymond Hunthausen made prayer the core of his life. Quoting him again, "My openness to reflect, to allow God to touch me with that sense of love. That happens only by a willingness to step away from the noise of our lives. Find some time to do that, so that when we come back into the mainstream, we come back with something that has been supplied by the Lord. You know this. He drew from deep well springs. He said, we can't let the well run dry. We really have to be willing to try at least to struggle with the issues of life as they touch us through the gospel. Personal prayer was a regular practice for Dutch. He once said, I don't have to go without prayer very many days to know things aren't right in my life. I'm not saying, as I might want to, Lord, point me in the right direction and help me to do the right thing. Keep me close to you so that what I do is really yours. And I should. He reflected on his own life and his need for divine guidance. What is needed is wisdom, and I don't have it. It's an issue of making oneself vulnerable. No one ever is totally, but I believe that we can't even try except through prayer. We need a growing appreciation that this is who Jesus is, the vulnerable one. And that's what is expected of us if we're to be disciples. I would like to jump over to 422 and close my remarks here. I might have a word or two to say at the end this evening, but I will promise to keep whatever else I have to say quite brief. Thank you for your patience with me attempting to share with you a little bit of the spirit of this book. I'm very much looking forward to hearing from family and from all of you that would like to share in the next period of our time together this evening. But on 422, just before the section that's called Seattle Transition, above the middle of the page, somewhere up there. One of his favorite books was Anthony DeMello's Awareness, a key to wisdom in life was to be found in the practice of detachment. Anthony DeMello writes, what is a loving heart? A loving heart is sensitive to the whole of life, to all persons. A loving heart doesn't harden itself to any person or thing. End quote. So ultimately our attachments, including narrow notions of what God is, who we are, or who is important to us, all these must give way to a detached spirit so that we can embrace all. Hence the small c on the text, small c, Catholic, in Hunthausen's open and yet deeply rooted large C, Catholicism. He was a Catholic. If there is a path to a universal, and I believe there is, by the way, and certainly Dutch Hunthausen, I believe it's fair to say, would believe this. If there is a path to a universal, that is a universal, a cosmic oneness, we're all one. If there is a path to a universal, it seems it can only be found paradoxically in each particular person's unique walk. It's through the particular that we can experience the universal. And this last line in this section seems the perfect segue to these dear nieces and nephews to take over in the next sharing. Here's the sentence that I fell in love with by learning about this through these very people at this table. I'm going to read this as a kind of prayer because it's the only way I can get through it, because it means a lot to me just to have learned about it. On page 422 in the middle of the page. Hunthausen's walk or hike, just one or two more switchbacks. As he loved to say on those Montana mountain treks with his nieces and nephews, still had adventures ahead. Thank you.
Well,
Good evening. I get to go first, so I'm Andy, for those that may not know me, and the favorite nephew of Archbishop Hunthausen. I had him well trained. I used to call and say, "It's your favorite nephew." And oh, hey, Drew. He called me Drew. And so I had him pretty well trained. The good part about going first is that I'm going to be done first, and you still have to go. And I'm going to try to be brief because we want to get to the second half of the game, right? In the spirit of Dutch. That's right. I just want to start just a few things about Uncle Dutch and about the book. First of all, thank you to Frank. As you could see, he got emotional. I've seen in the last 2 days he's gotten emotional several times, and to me what that says is how deeply this has been a part of him over the last decade or more. I've been writing this book and working on these topics, I guess, since graduate school, really, or your doctorate level work. But it has impacted him so deeply, and he has worked so hard. And when I read this book, part of me says, "Oh my God, how did you do this? This is unbelievable. The amount of work it took, the amount of energy, the amount of research, the amount of pulling things together and trying to put it in a form that is edible for us, which is really important." And he talked about the three phases of this: conscience, courage, and character. And of course, if Dutch were here tonight, he wouldn't really want to talk about himself very much. He wouldn't want to talk about what happened to him in Seattle. He wouldn't want to talk about the troubles, I'll call them. But he would try to give us a message of character and conscience and courage. He would do that. And so when you read this book, if you haven't read it yet, there's really good opportunity to be really angry. And we were talking about this last night because in my mind, in my opinion, he was a very persecuted man, and he was treated poorly by the church, by the government, by many critics that he had. And it wasn't that I believe people should have agreed with Dutch, but if anyone could get any kind of, I guess, take his example in any way, they would have recognized that it's not a fair fight. He's not going to treat people the way he was treated in this respect. And so I get angry about the reasons behind the visitation, the investigation, call it what it is, and what happened to him and the unfairness behind it all. You'll read it in the book. It's very well documented. It's not opinion. There's fact here about how things happened and when they happened, and there is some argument about why they happened, but there's multiple reasons. And what is true about what happened, I believe, is that Uncle Dutch, the Archbishop, was just trying to be that Vatican II bishop that he was dedicating himself to be. And Frank talked about today on the radio show, which is really neat. I got to sit in the room and watch these two gentlemen do this thing. It was pretty amazing. I can't wait for you to hear it, because Brian Kahn rates his shows, and he turned off the mic and he said, "That was an A show. That was one of the best shows I've done." And I don't tell you that lightly. This was a great show. And so I agree, because I was there. It was really amazing to listen to how they put it together. And so I really appreciate that. But back to Uncle Dutch and the kind of guy he was. And he really, it was so simple. It was simple for him when he was here. It was simple for him when he was a student. You know, he wanted to, when he decided to become a priest, and it was far into his seminary days that he made the final decision, but when he did, he was all in, both feet, everything, I'm going forward. And he wanted to be a parish priest. He had no ambition to be the college president. He had no ambition to be a bishop. He had no ambition to be the archbishop. And all of that fell into his lap, and his way of thinking is, this is where God wants me to be. This is the Spirit is moving me in this direction. And that was what it was all about. It was about that first beatitude. I've pulled it out last night. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And this is what it's all about for him. To be poor in spirit is to be humble and to be open to the Spirit of the Lord and the Word of God and where they want you to be. And the opposite of that, pride, is the opposite of humility and to be humble in the face of God. It brings misery. Pride brings anger, seeking a revenge, especially when one is offended and hurt. If every person were humble and poor in spirit, there would be no war. And he didn't write that. I found that, but it is him. I mean, that first beatitude is all about Uncle Dutch, and that's all he was trying to do, and all he did his entire life was say, what does the Spirit ask me to do? I'm going to move forward and do that to the best of my ability. And to live out the commitments and the changes that Vatican II asked us to do. Frank called about this shared responsibility and opening the church up to the people and having them be part of the decision-making, part of the Mass, part of every aspect, part of the finances, you name it, that we are the church. We are all part of that. And he saw it that way, and he tried to commit to living that in his everyday life. He didn't have a mean bone in his body. He never said one bad thing about John Paul II or Ratzinger, Benedict. He never, when he felt he was treated unfairly or accused of something that was twisted, or in this day and age, or you can call it fake news, whatever you want to call it, but he was treated poorly in many aspects and misunderstood, and he responded by saying, how can I understand where they're coming from? How can I try to make it right in my own mind, my own heart? And his internal peace is one of the greatest gifts that he has, because I dream about being Dutchy-like. I mean, that's what I want to do every day. I try to take that to work. I try to take it to my marriage. I try to take it to my friendships and to church, of course, but it's really difficult because my internal peace doesn't hold a candle to what he was able to do. When I'm challenged and roughed up internally, I know that it's so difficult, and he was such a person of peace, and he would, that prayer and that centeredness, he could take a really bad situation and turn it around and love that person, love that situation, love whoever was in front of him, and make it so right, so good, so positive. I never heard him say a bad thing about anyone. Where all of us going, I can't believe they did that to you. I can't believe this has happened to our wonderful uncle, the greatest guy ever that we love so much, that only lied about the next switchback. That's the only thing I lie about. And so it was really difficult to watch. Another of the Beatitudes, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be the children of God. And peacemakers not only live a peaceful life, but they also bring that peace to their friendships, to others, and preserve peace between God and between all of us. And those two Beatitudes are Dutch. And there's not much more to say about who he was in terms of that. But I'll tell you a couple of stories really quickly. So just a little bit more about who he is. There's a whole bunch of stories in the book, so I won't tell you any of those. Frank did a good job of talking to all of us and then putting a lot of it in the book and all of that. And Guido Buni told a great story last night about purposely cutting the power in the early 1950s and
On this campus, right?
on this campus and having a great time and squirt gun fights in the dark. And he talked about Dutch having a flashlight under each arm with 2 squirt guns, and nailing everyone. And he said the one that was the most surprised when he hit Father Kirkin. He came up on Father Kirkin and blasted him with water in the door. Anyway, Guido Buni had a great story about that. It was wonderful last night. But anyway, where was I? I was talking about something. I can't remember.
Another one of your stories.
Oh, another one of the stories. So just about who he was. It's not in the book. And as a young person in college, I was in college during this time, from 83 to 87, that time frame. And I remember I was at the University of Montana. I was here at Carroll for a year, and then I was at the University of Montana. And I remember taking literally carloads of kids out to Seattle, college kids, to see Dutch. We were really going to have fun in Seattle. So it's like, oh yeah, we'll go out there and see my uncle, and he can get us probably take us to a game. You know, I mean, we'll eat well, we'll get to see parts of Seattle. So always when we get there, so welcoming. And he was going through HE double toothpicks at the time. Totally clueless, you know, 20 years old, and hey, Dutch, what can you do for us? We're ready to have some fun. And he would drop everything and say, let's go to the market down at the waterfront, let's go to a Mariners game. What do you need? And how can I help and make your experience really great? And I did that multiple times and visited Uncle Dutch in Seattle, and it was a great time, and never really had a clue what was really going on and the pressures and pain that he was living through at the time. Another story that talks about who he was is after I graduated, I entered the Channel program, which is a volunteer program in Seattle, and the Archdiocese ran. And I either taught at a Catholic grade school or you were part of a parish ministry or something like that. And so I taught at St. Brendan's up in Bothell, north of Seattle. And I remember that coming into the spring of my first year, you had to decide whether you were going to do another year or not. And I really didn't want to. Well, I didn't connect. I had a great time, wonderful people, all of that, but I just didn't connect, and I didn't know what to do. I just, all this self stuff. I don't want to let Dutch down. I don't want to embarrass him. You know, Hunthausen not living up to whatever. So I called him and asked him to have lunch, and he came to me up in Bothell, and we went to a park and sat on the grass, and I started telling him all about it. This is in 1989. I was 24 years old, and he was still going through all kinds of stuff. Archbishop Murphy was just coming in. He was sharing his power. He was just getting his decision-making powers back, and all of those kinds of things are just had. And you know, there was a lot going on in his life, and I was pretty unaware. And I was even living in Seattle at the time. I knew a little bit about it, but you know, you're 24, and it's all about you. And I told him my sob story about how hard this was to decide whether to stay another year and teach school or go back to Montana. I think I wanted to go back to Montana, and blah, blah, blah. And I just felt so bad. I didn't want to embarrass you, Dutch, or do something that would, you know, you wouldn't be proud of me. And he just kind of went, what are you talking about? I had no care about that. You need to do what's good for you, and none of this reflects on me. And he was so wonderful about it, making me understand that, you know, his life and legacy had there was no pressure. And he loved and accepted you where you were and how you were and what you needed to do. And by the way, how can I help you? and what can I do for you? And ease your pain or counsel you or whatever it might be, when he probably could have used a good friend and a good counselor at the time. And he was just an amazing guy. So I don't want to hog all the time, but I just wanted to mention a couple of those things. And I'll read the book because it's really powerful, and there's so much there about him, and all through the book, completely through all of it, you get a sense of his character and really his courage and his conscience. Whether it's a speech or something that you read and you say, I can't believe they did that to him, or someone acted that way toward him, and then his response, and you just get, your anger gets deflated right away. He just keeps working through the book. So I'm so glad you're here. Thank you, Dr. Seck, for having us. Really appreciate this, and appreciate Frank being here. And I think I'm passing it on to Sarah now.
I'm Sarah Walsh, Dutch's favorite niece, and when I called to say, Dutch is your favorite niece, he always said, hi, Sarah, just saying.
Yeah, bad part about
we were all his favorite nieces and nephews. There's a bunch in the audience here tonight. So I ran into these guys at lunch today, and I said, what are we doing? What are we doing today? And Frank said, why don't you just pick a passage out of the book and read that and give a reflection on that? So I was in my car out here tonight before coming inside, and I just kind of opened up, and I opened up to something I thought was pretty good, and I had a story that went along with it, so I'll read that, which is on page, can you hear me? Everyone hear me? Okay, which is on page 180. So it's kind of the whole part of it starts on 179, and it was when Dutch was communicating to the priests of the archdiocese about Archbishop Worrell. Bishop Worrell, was he bishop or archbishop when he went to Seattle? I can't remember, but he was communicating to them about their shared powers, if you will, which would have been a tough thing to do because it was a kind of a surprise to him. When you read the book, you'll find out. So I'm going to start kind of just at the second paragraph of page 180, quoting Dutch. He said, "Our relationship, which has come," and he's talking about the world here, "our relationship, which has come to mean so very much to me personally, will, I know, continue to grow stronger and closer as the days unfold." He could not predict how those ensuing days and weeks would unfold. "Among the duties that are mine as your Archbishop, none are more important or more sacred than the preaching and teaching of the saving gospel of Jesus Christ, and of witnessing to that gospel to the very best of my ability, by all I say and do. I am firmly committed to doing this, but I cannot do it alone. None of us can. We can only do it with the strength that comes from God's grace. We can only do it in union with each other and with the Church Universal. Thus united, we have a power that we can never have merely of ourselves. Our ministry is one," he reminded them. "It is always shared, and it can even be delegated, but it must never be divided. The Spirit of the Lord has formed us into one body, one holy and gifted people." Hunthausen called on the priests to join him and Bishop Worrell in this, quote, "this unified and shared ministry we have been given." He did not try to conceal his anguish, writing that the long days and the complex events which have brought us to this particular moment as a church have been extremely trying and agonizing ones for me. And he imagined things could not be easy for them either. Understanding has not come easily. Decisions have come only after a good deal of painful and prayerful struggling and searching. But through it all, the grace of God has been present, and God has allowed me to grasp better than ever before just what it means to live by faith. So, when those who've read the book, and hopefully if you haven't, you will read it. Thank you, Frank, by the way, again, for writing it, because it's a story that needs to be told for sure. So here's this guy, Bishop Worrell, was brought in to share power with Dutch, and for him to communicate that way to the priests, I know that I couldn't do it. I know that I wouldn't have that, as Andy talked about, that inner peace, and really that humility to speak in that way to people. I'd be a little bit more fiery, for sure. I said last night at Our Lady of the Valley, I said, I got more of the Walsh than the Hunthausen in me, for sure, because when I read the book, it really makes me a little bit mad at the church, and as Andy and Frank have said, it's almost unimaginable what happened, and that Dutch had to go through what he did. But that passage on Worrell, so here's the rest of my story on that, which I think is maybe in the book too, so I hope I tell it the same. It's been a few years since I told it, with Bishop Worrell. So in June, I think it was towards the end of June of 2006, I was in Washington, D.C. it was about a 4 or 5 day business trip there. And on Sunday, I went to Mass at the cathedral. I think it's St. Mark's Cathedral that's in D.C. St. Mark's or St. Matthew's, I always forget the name of it. So I showed up for Mass. Somebody else that works with me happened to be with me there, and we walk in, not dressed. I think we were in sweats and the whole bit out walking, and walk in. It's like, what's going on here? There were priests galore and nuns and cardinals, red beanies there. I'm like, what is going on? So we asked what's going on. Well, it happened to be the first Mass that the then Archbishop Worrell was celebrating in Washington, D.C. He became the Archbishop of Washington, D.C. So his very first Mass. So it's like, wow. It was a weird deal for me, because I knew this guy. I'd only met him, I think, once or twice, and he always seemed like a pleasant guy. But again, back to my fiery side, it was like, how could he have even done that, in that circumstance? But so this was 2006, so several years afterwards. So after Mass, the Archbishop was greeting people. So I just thought, I've got to say something. I've just got to say something to him and just introduce myself and talk. And I was kind of nervous about it too. So I waited in line. There was a long line, waited in line, and I got up there and I said, Archbishop Worrell, I said, I met you years ago. I'm Sarah, different last name at the time, but Sarah Walsh, and I'm one of Archbishop Hunthausen's nieces. And he just kind of stopped everything and grabbed my hands. Touches me, and just we had this lovely conversation. How is he doing? It's been a while since I talked to him, and he just overflowing with love for Dutch. This person who had spent some time with Dutch, and it had to have been a very uncomfortable situation, just was very, you could just tell, loved Dutch, even through that all. And wanted to keep on talking, and I had a big line behind me. I was almost starting to feel stupid about the whole thing, so I'm like, maybe I better check these other people out. And then when I got home, told Dutch, guess who I saw, and told him the whole story. And Dutch was as filled with grace as World was, for each other. So just thought it really spoke volumes to me, because I don't think I would hope, as Andy said, I want to be more Dutchy-like all the time. I would hope, I strive to be like Dutch or any of the other 6 in that family. The 7 of them were all very saintly, but I don't know if I could have been that way. The other piece of that story, which I hope I can get through here, but it's kind of cute too. So my son Patrick and there's a story about him in this book. He died about it was a week or 10, maybe 2 weeks after I think that I was there in DC, maybe, but I can't remember all the time in there. But so the week I was gone for business, Patrick stayed with my mom, which lived out in East Helena, and Dutch and Jack lived with my mom out there. So Patrick got to spend that week with those elders, and so I'd call every night to check on him, and it was funny because, well, what'd you do today, Pat? The family will get a kick out of this, and it was the same every day. Well, we got up, we had mass, and we ate some mush. Mush is oatmeal in our family. My dad always called it mush. All it is oatmeal with it stuff. And we ate some mush. Then we went to play golf, and that was like the day every day that he got to spend that last week with those characters. And I guess what a week that he would have had, and not knowing, of course, it was almost the end of his too short of life for sure. I also remember getting back and going out to Mom's to pick Patrick up after the week, and Dutch saying to me, I don't know how you moms do this. I mean, I had to, Dutch was like the Aaron, he was taking him everywhere. There was guitar lessons, there was basketball camp, just every day, as you are with a 14, almost 15-year-old kid. So he was dragging him around everywhere. So Dutch said he was exhausted after that week, but had such a fun week with him. So I always thought, what a blessing. So back really briefly, and I talked last night at Our Lady of the Valley too, just about the book, and really how angry it really makes me all over again. And also a bunch of us, the family there last night, reflected on Dutch never really talked about this at all, what was going on. Like Andy so eloquently said, he never talked about it, and neither did our parents, the other elders. They never really talked about it. We all knew, so it would have been when the thick of it, I would have been end of high school, beginning of college, when everything started. But we knew something was going on, but just didn't know the extent of it. And reading this and reading all the details, I wished they would have said something. I wish they would have involved us more in this. I wish they would have said something more to all of us about this. So I don't know if we would have done anything. Again, you're 18 to 22, 23, 24, so you're kind of into yourself. But I would hope that we would have. But the lesson I guess I take out of this is that we all should speak up when things are wrong in our church. And there is plenty wrong in our church. There's plenty right in our church too. Mostly good. There's mostly good for sure. But the things that aren't right are big things. They're really, really big things. And I hope that if anything comes out of a book like this, with all the details and all the secrecy and the lies and the lack of transparency, and I mean, it's something else. It's almost like a
Dan Brown.
It's not like a what?
Dan Brown.
A Dan Brown novel. I mean, there is a lot of that in there. You're almost like you can't even believe it happened. So I hope if one thing does come out of that, is that maybe for the good of our church, which I know most of us anyway I'm assuming in this room, really love, for the good of the church, that we do speak out on those things somehow. I don't know what that looks like. I said that last night too. I don't know what it looks like because it's hard. Where do you go? Where do you go in the church if you want to say you think something's not right, or a people or a group of people are not being treated like they should be treated? So I don't know what that looks like, but I hope that somehow something that good comes out of it, that we can make some really important changes that need to be made. So the church is around. So it sticks around for a little bit longer because I think right now it's in peril for lots of reasons. So thank you again, Frank, for writing the book, and I hope everyone reads it and it inspires all of us to be more Dutchy-like, as Andy said. So, thank you.
I'm Kathleen Hunthausen, Andy and Bill's sister. I'd like to say I'm their younger sister, but I'm not. I always try to get away with that, and they never let me. First of all, I hope I can get through this without crying. And if I can't, I'm wondering if somebody has a Kleenex they could bring me, because I don't have any. So if that happens, if someone would rescue me, I'd appreciate it. We'll see. Maybe by just saying that I won't, but you know, I feel often. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Often I feel, when reading this book, there were times when the tears were right there, because I felt so bad for Dutch. And the book is marvelous. Dutch influenced me, like he did so many of us, nieces and nephews. In reading the book, I realized he influenced me beyond what I realized he influenced me. And then in reading, I realized his influence on me is going to continue for the rest of my life. And I hope that I can live my life so that there's a ripple effect, like there is with him. There is this ripple effect with Uncle Dutch. And I honestly believe it's touched all of us in his family in a massive way. We've been so blessed, beyond blessed. And you know, when you're growing up, you think everybody else is growing up just like you, and they're not. They're not. And I look back on this blessed growing up in childhood I've had, and it isn't just Dutch that is that influence. There, all the other elders, our parents, all 7 in that family, and the spouses, and all of my cousins that I love so much. But we've been so blessed, and so this ripple effect is massive. And not just the ripple effect for us as a family, but for Carroll College and all of the people that he touched here, and as a coach, and as a bishop, an archbishop, and in his retirement years. You know, there's one place in there where he said his retirement was his longest assignment. And he didn't think that was going to happen. That was a very long assignment. He had no idea he was going to live that long. And oftentimes he'd say he wasn't sure why, you know, but he did. I didn't hear him say this, but there is, I heard this from someone, and I believe it's true, and I think it's somewhere, it's in this book. I tried to find it because I read it. I read this book mostly at night when I was in bed, and so what I would do is dog-ear the pages, but I didn't highlight, so I couldn't find it when I went back. But something like, someone was asking, not exactly the purpose of his life, or, well, I guess it was. You know, I'm remembering now. It was my daughter. My daughter Katie did, for one of her classes at Helena College, had to do a sociological project. And she decided to do it on aging and spirituality. And so she took 3 groups of age of people who were over 65 or over. I was in the young old, because I am over 65, between 65 and 70, and then the age from somewhere in the mid 70s to the mid 80s was the middle old, and then over 85 or 90 were the old. And so she interviewed me. She asked us all the same questions. And what was the question? How do you see your role in society? I think it was something like that. And each group answered a little bit differently, but the way Dutch and Jack both, she interviewed Dutch and Jack together, but the way they answered it was I thought it was very Dutchy-like, Dutchy and Jack-like. It was about, Dutch said something, well, I can't do much right now. I can't walk. I can't go out and speak. There's not a lot I can do, but I can pray. And I can pray for all of the younger people that they can carry on with the peace and justice issues. He said it in some way, something like that. I can't exactly remember the words, but it was so Dutchy-like. It was like he prays so for the future. It's like the ripple effect of what I was talking about. And I think that ripple effect is going to influence my life for a long time. And I want to tell you, Frank, this book is extremely well written. I have to read it again, though, because it's very dense. Even the margins are small. There's a lot of words, on the page. And I noticed that right away. And I thought, am I going to get through this by April 8th? Or is this the April? Yeah, because I know it's going to be on this panel. I did make it. But it is very dense. I have to go back because I have to remember some of these people the research is phenomenal, just phenomenal. And I also really want to read your book too, Mr. Driscoll. I would like to talk to you later.
Storm of a Lifetime.
Storm of a Lifetime. Well, I unless I write it down, I won't remember that. So I'll talk to you after. But it is phenomenal, and it's just I think so often now about how my life has been influenced, and how I wish I could be more Dutchy-like, or Harriet-like, or Aunt Donna-like, or Uncle Jack-like, or any of our elders. I would have people ask me. I'm a little bit older than Andy, so I was more in my 30s, and I had young children when Dutchy was going through all this. My kids were little and in grade, small kids and in grade school, and so I was pretty busy. But we didn't really hear much about it from him or from my parents. One thing I do remember, though, and I don't know, I've never even mentioned this to my brothers, and Bill might remember, because he and I are fairly close in age, but I remember when Dutch did the tax resistance thing, withholding half of the taxes. I remember hearing about that at home, because our dad did his taxes, remember? Our dad did his taxes. Tony, his brother Tony, did his taxes. And so I remember Dad and Mom kind of discussing it a little bit. And Dutchy, I don't remember Dutchy speaking to Dad about it, in my presence. But I remember Mom and Dad talking about it a little bit. And I remember Dad sitting down. He sat down at the head of the dining room table and did Dutchy's taxes.
He did mine too.
He did yours too.
He was good at that.
Yeah, he did mine a time or two too. But people, I was asked a few times during that time, because here I am in my 30s, and I guess people thought maybe I knew exactly what was going on with Dutch, which I didn't, because he never talked about it. But people would say, what did your uncle say about what's going on? What's going on with him? And I'd say, well, I don't know. He doesn't really talk about it when he's here. Doesn't say much. I was only what I read in the paper or whatever. But because, and I know that my cousins will agree with this, and I said this last night. When Dutchy came home from Seattle for family gatherings, whether it was a wedding or whether it was his vacation in August or family reunion or the holidays, whatever it was, when he came home, he just wanted to be with us and enjoy us. He just wanted, it was his haven. It was his safe place. It was his happy place. We were his, as I said, we were his, and I think we will continue to be, his greatest joy. His nieces and nephews and all of our children, he just loved it, making the whistles and taking people on hikes and carrying the kids on his shoulders, whatever it was. He was like the Pied Piper. He always had a bunch of kids after him, whether it was us when we were little or our children. And he had a lot of joys in life. I'm not saying that Carroll College, being the president here, and all of the other things that he did in his life were not joyful for him, because I believe that they were. But the children, particularly, were his greatest joy. And he loved the kids. And I also told this story last night about my grandson, Oliver, who, this was a couple years ago, when he was 6, and so he would be Dutchy's great nephew. So the boys, my 2 grandsons, just absolutely love Legendary, of course, like all the kids do. And they don't understand any of the history of it, about how we have come to be at Legendary and all of the history about Dutch and everything. But I would take them whenever they were visiting here from Portland to see Dutch and Jack, and they'd visit. And on this particular time, on the way back from our Legendary reunion, I was telling them how the reason we get to go to Legendary is because of Dutch and Jack. And so we're going to go stop by there, and we're going to tell them how it was and tell them what you liked about it. They love hearing about it. They're too old to go now. And so we went there, and I'm sure these, as two little boys, you know, they see these two little old men sitting in their chair, basically not even trying to be able to walk. Can't even imagine them like we did when we were children, how they were in the water with us and took us skiing and water skiing and all the things that we did with them. But Dutch asked Oliver, well, what did you do when you were there? And Oliver told him, you know, with excitement, childlike excitement, you know, 6-year-old swimming and hiking and all the things that we did and all the fun meals that we had and all the games they played. And so Dutch said to him, did you have fun? Oh, yeah, he said, I did. And you know how Dutch shakes the little kid's hands and he kind of shakes them a little bit? And he said to him, and Dutch was just a huge grin on his face, just he was enjoying every minute of it. And he took his hand and he says, good. He said, we'll do it again next year. And the kids were just thrilled. And so they ask us every year, do we get to go to Legendary this year? Well, we never really quite know that, do we? But anyway, it was, he was just so influential in my life. And there's a couple of things that I want to read here. It's a couple of quotes of Dutchie's that I think were particularly touching for me. And it says here, as Frank writes, he says, he struggled with the challenges of being a public figure, facing all the responsibilities of speaking truth to power. And this is what Dutchie said. I don't want to be in this situation. I'd like to slip into seclusion somewhere so that I could take up my comfortable prayer life and let someone who could do it a lot better than I take up this responsibility. But again, I see my reluctance as part of the growth process. Something would be wrong if I were comfortable. If I got comfortable in anything the Lord wanted me to do, then I'd have to start worrying. So he lived in that discomfort. And it doesn't feel very good, but he did. He lived there and he was committed to living there. And then just this last thing I want to read, and then I'll be finished. But it says, Hunthausen believed we are all called to holiness, and this is the way to human happiness. And this is Dutchie talking. If we're going to live a holy life, if we're going to live a truly human life, this is the only way it's going to happen. We give ourselves away. We live for the life of the other. That is what love is all about. That has touched me. Yes, it's a command, but properly understood, it's a lot more than that. It's the Lord trying to tell us who we are. To live a happy life, this is how you do it.
Frank, I just got to ask you now. I've been, my name's Bill Hunthausen. I'm Andy's twin. Well, we were called that a lot of years ago. But anyway, I'm his much older brother. Frank, now the paperback books have the same print as the hardback, right?
Yes.
Because I've been reading Andy's when I've been visiting my dad, so now I got the hardback. So I just want to make sure that
It's actually the same.
but quite frankly, there's so much to say. I did mark a couple of pages, and I wanted to, first of all, a fact check on what Kathleen just said. We've got a lot of bright people out here, and they might be doing some fact checking on that. But we were quite well aware of the tax, that he was going to withhold half his taxes. And my dad was an auditor for the state of Montana for a number of years, and he was really good with numbers and taxes and everything. So it really could have been a conversation with Dutch. I mean, who does the Archbishop's taxes? He probably had someone out there. Yeah, Dad did, I think. But I'm just trying to say, if you do a fact check, then, and it turns into he just had a conversation with Dutch.
Just say you read it on the internet.
Read it on the internet. But when I read the other couple nights this week, since Andy said there was going to be a panel here, I planned on coming to one of these, either Our Lady of the Valley or this one. I didn't make both, but I thought, panel. I said, I haven't read the whole book. Are we going to be quoted for, But I remember a couple times in recent years, well, I guess 1985 isn't recent, but that was one time where I saw it. about Dutch. And the other time was out here about me and my cousins. Lynn, you know, probably 3 years ago, they were still living in your dad's house, your mom and dad's house. And we got called. I got a call in the morning. See, in the summer, my wife and I are both teachers at Helena Middle School, and that's a tough enough job, but a lot of wonderful people. We had some of your kids, well, I don't know about all, but I know Reese Roncalli's out there, and I had a couple of theirs, wonderful kids that we have. But with that, it's a real tough job, but we've been able and fortunate to have summers off. So we've had summers off with our kids and whatnot, and so I get a phone call in the morning. Uncle Jack, about 3 years ago, was taking care of Dutch, and Dutch went through a series of small strokes and whatnot, and Jack was, I think, you know, realizing just fiercely independent, both these guys. So humble, so loving, but I think he realized, looking back now, that he was losing his ability to help Dutch, and that somehow this is falling apart. So I ended up going over, and Jack gave me a little rundown on how to get Dutch out of his, move him from the wheelchair to his chair and to his, you know, little, I think it was electric chair at the time too. So I grab his belt, and I'm thinking, well, Jack's a strong guy, but I didn't realize how much strength he had lost in recent years. So I grabbed this belt, and I'm thinking, okay, Dutch says, all right, I'm ready. I cranked it. He said, whoa! He just yelled. He said, about threw me through the ceiling. I said, sorry, Dutch. Well, and that's the fun part. But there was a couple of times Jack was in the hospital, and the doctor, you know, probably the Jack is never mean either. Probably the most direct he was. Just Bill, just hold on. So I got some backup. Cindy Sturgar. The Sturgars, if you know, they can come and back you up pretty well. So Cindy just happened to talk to her on the phone. Jack was in the emergency room, and we worked it out. Jack, it just isn't going to work, and that's when we had to figure out how to move the two out of their house and get them set up in rehab. And Dutch was having some problems. Now, to make a connection, when Dutch was trying to think of the word. He was ordained bishop, but he was installed. There you go. That's right. In 1962, I was 8 years old, and my cousin Mark and we lined up. I mean, I'm exaggerating to make a point, like my sixth graders, 52 times to kiss his ring. He just smiled every time, not once. What are these kids doing here? No, it was just, we just knelt down, kissed his ring, lined up again. We were over here. So there I am at 8 years old, and then here I am at that time, well, I'll be 65 in May. We are retiring, by the way, so any more of your kids coming through, they won't have me. Probably 62, and Dutch says, gotta go to the bathroom. So I get him out of his chair, and I'm thinking, is he asking? So I'll take him in there. I had no clue what the routine was. Get him in his wheelchair, wheel him in there, and without being too specific with this, but I'm sitting there at 62 years old, no practice. I'm not a CNA or anything, you know. And I'm taking care of business for him. And he's just standing there, just so humble. And I thought, wow, all those memories just flashing back. And then, it was probably that, I don't know if it was weeks later, Father Mike Ryan came out from Seattle, and we had a little chat. And I broke down out in the, even just saying it, I just remember it. Anyway, I broke down out in the driveway. I just couldn't imagine how this was coming to an end, and it was just something. All the memories that flooded back. Anyway, so we get him. We had some fun times, taking Jack over to visit Dutch in rehab. You know, we had a little chat, and Jack, you know, said, "Which is gratitude. Our lives are full of gratitude." And here we are heading over, and sure enough, God gave us a belly laugh. Get into the apple cooney, and Jack proceeds to sit down, and he didn't realize that the remote control was on the chair. He think it was a sitcom or something. And Jack's legally blind, so we're sitting there visiting with Dutch, and Dutch was able to talk to us. He's in bed. All of a sudden, this chair starts to come up. Jack said, "What's going on here?" I don't know what, Jack, but we found out. Then it stopped. He about fell off on his nose. Found the remote. He had been sitting on the remote. So in the midst of all this, we had a lot of belly laughs, and right at the very end at Apple Cooney, my son Will plays football at Tech, and sorry, I mean, that's a big thing. I've got Carol stuff and Tech stuff. I've just got to figure out where I'm heading that day when I put it on. But Dutch, this is probably a week or two before he died. And he's laying in bed, hadn't been out of bed, and the cancer, you could smell it a little bit, but he just had that spirit. And he was still talking at the time. And Will comes in, Uncle Dutch, and Dutch said, so how's everything going? Good, good. So he said, just remember, he could lift his arm, but he said, you know, when you're in the end zone, you want to do that one-handed catch. He throws his arm back in his bed, and he kind of laughs, you know. And this is Dutch, up to the week or two before he died. Just absolutely amazing. But a couple things that Andy spoke to, Sarah and Tad's, Kathleen, my sister, we call her Tad's a Wadson. You know, I remember walking with Dutch here in Helena when I was going to Carroll. And he never asked me, you thinking of the seminary? No, we chatted. Walking in the neighborhoods up there, you know, where you saw where I lived with him when I was a freshman at Carroll. And we'd play racquetball. When he wasn't traveling, he'd give me I don't know, we didn't have cell phones. I honestly don't remember. I left a note, I don't know. So I'd reserve a place, we'd play racquetball over here, and that was just cool. That was just Dutch. It was special, but it was just normal. You'd expect it. And you know, we had that conversation. And then I worked many summers up at Legendary with a couple of folks out here. Billy Pena back there. There were 3 bills in one cab in one summer, and we worked called Buck, Doe, and Fawn. And it went by age. He's much older. That's it. So if you, yeah, but I do remember. I decided Eldon Curtis was here, and I graduated from Carroll. It was 1979. When I went to Louvain. But the year before that, I was a youth minister over in Spokane. And this is Dutch. So I'm in Spokane in 79, probably March or April. He gives me a call, says, I'm going to come over and visit. You think he'd stay at the cathedral or rectory? Well, he did stay at the rectory in my bed. Well, Dutch, you can sleep in my bed. He's right there. And then we had dinner that night, and we all cooked in. That's Dutch. I'm sleeping on the little couch. I have a little extra room there. And so that's how regular he was, and how much we just expected it. It's just normal. He didn't say anything. So in 1979, I didn't say, well, you know, the Trident stuff, I'm kind of having a hard time. You want me to help me a little bit with what I should say or do. It wasn't part of his conversation. It was all about me and how I'm doing and getting ready to go. The next thing, it was, getting a little dry mouth here, but just my nervousness. So here we are, August of 1979, and my last time was with Dutch. So I'm flying out of Seattle. That's where my plane ticket was, heading straight over to Heathrow. And so I stayed with him the night before, having ice cream. We hiked. He was still out at the seminary at the time, and we took walks, just chatted. It wasn't about what was going on. It wasn't about all the troubles he was dealing with or anything brewing. It was just about me, about how excited I was or nervous I was. And then I remember, you guys remember that? Well, I was the last one there, I'm sure. I got the money from his sock drawer.
Look at you. His
sock drawer, $90-some of change that I got. And I used some of that to get my luggage on board. Anyway, but it was just, that's who Dutch was, you know. And he also sent me some money while I was over. That was kind of nice. One time when the rector, Father Bill Graytack, comes up here, here's a check for you. Your uncle wanted me to give it to you. Oh, thank you, $100. That's pretty good. Not bad for the exchange rate over there at the time. That was pretty good. There's just one more thing I wanted to bring up. It was 19, and I looked in your book. I did some fact checking. I want to see what made me saw at Butte Central. I taught at Butte Central 1 year, 1985, 86. And I remember the nuns had just moved out of the upstairs of Butte Central High School. I had 11 bedrooms to myself. So I'm living up there, and yeah, I'm a little weird. I had shirts in one closet, pants in another. Why not use them? It was easy. Good way to organize. And I took the elevator down. I must have read it in the NCR. Dutch didn't call and say I'm having a difficult time, but that was when it whirled. That's the whole thing that started then. And I remember how angry I was, and how upset I was. And I went downstairs with my big pad. I sent a handwritten letter, 2-3 pages, front and back side. And I remember sitting down there, nobody else in the place. The elevator goes down to the bottom where the gymnasium is. And there was some rooms off to the side there, a little kitchen area. And I just sat there and I remember starting to cry. I just sobbed and I was angry. And I remember stopping and writing and stopping and writing. He never did write back about that. He didn't call and say, hey, thanks for the letter. I really liked the part, you know. No. He just knew that I knew. He just knew that I knew. And I know I was just angry about what was going on. This couldn't happen to Dutch. He was the kindest, most humble man, peace-filled man that I know. Anyway, I just remember, well, I just know I'm not that way. I'm not like he is. But I want to be. Well, just one last thing. I got one more. I mean, this is Dutch. So I'm teaching school in Missouri the next 2 years. And they asked me, can you get your uncle down here to speak? We have cousins down there, but they must have thought he had an inside track because of how he feels about his nieces and nephews. I don't know, but sure enough, he's flying down there. I remember flying into Kansas City. We had a plane. I went in with him. His conversation wasn't about what's going on in Seattle. Not about any of the difficulties he's experiencing. All about how things going. The whole plane ride back was just wonderful. It's just so peaceful. And that's Dutch. And that's what I want you to hear. And to know that the guy was prayer-filled and just unbelievable. The Bob Morgan painting about Room that was original. What about Dutch? Yeah, that's another one. I could go on and on, but a true story. Up a legendary, or not legendary, but Moose Lake. I'll leave that one to go. I think I'll leave it there because I'm doing pretty good. I didn't have to use my Kleenex, but the guy was so loving and caring and peace-filled. I'm just full of joy. And if I can attain 50% of what he lived, I'd be a much better person I am now. So, amen.
Is this hello? Is it working? So Frank, you probably need to get up there at that one. You might get some questions.
Stories.
So my charge is to hand this to anyone who'd like to tell a story about Dutch or talk about Slide.
Thanks, Andy. Frank, thanks for the kind comments, and thank you for sharing. I'm John Driscoll. Just try to do this real briefly. I'm an old smoke jumper. It's old broken down smoke jumpers. We try to do trails around the country. And I decided to go back to New York for a program that some guy with a New Jersey accent that had been a smoke jumper had put together with Gateway National Park. So after Hurricane Sandy, to help the city respond. So I went back and we did some work in Central Park and Jamaica Bay, and the place where all the firemen were from that were killed, putting the fire line behind their town of Sandy Hook out there on the Far Rockaway. And I cut in line around some poison ivy under the Verrazano Narrow Bridge with freighters going by. It was a great gig. But anyhow, while I was doing this, I had to see Tiger Robbins, who's a Montana guy. My cousin Mike, who's a priest at Notre Dame, said, you got to talk to Tiger about what you're working on with Archbishop Hunthausen. So I had done that on the subway going from his clinic in Lincoln Center out to Queens. We talked over the sound of the subway and then put that behind me, went down to the project, and there's this guy running it with a Jersey accent named Reinhardt. And he's the laziest guy I ever saw. He's a big guy, and he's laying on the front, on the couch, and it's kind of, he just wasn't with it. But we went out and did all these things, and when we were, it was about 6 of us. We were cutting trail for handicapped people down through this brush to Jamaica Bay for the Park Service. And I was down in there hacking away, and the guy that was a contact point for us from the Gateway National Park, he comes down and taps me on the shoulder, and he says, come on up to the truck. So I go up there, and we're standing next to Reinhardt's truck, and they fire him. It's the first time I've ever seen a smoke jumper fired, right? I'm going, oh my God, I never thought I would ever see this. So I'm supposed to take this guy in his truck, go back down to Far Rockaway, go to the old missile base we're staying at, have him call his daughter, because while we were talking to him, they said, there's something wrong with you. And he said, no, I've been up to Sloan Kettering. Well, when he said that, I knew he had a big problem he wasn't telling us about. So we go down there, and it's real sad. And he's talking about those dirty SOBs. They just didn't want to see him die and all this. And I'm going, well, yeah, what's your point? So anyhow, we're down there, and he asked me to soft boil him a couple of eggs. So I did. And then I went up and got his stuff because I had to get him out to his daughter, who was just really worried about him. And so we're sitting there while he's eating the soft-boiled eggs, which I did just right. And to make small talk, I told him I'd been up and I'd met this guy from Mutiny named Tiger Robbins. And he goes, this is unbelievable. He goes, you know Tiger Robbins? And I said, yeah. How do you know him? And I said, well, my cousin Mike told me to go talk to him. He's a new guy. Well, I know who he is. He's my best friend. He says, he used to be in the Smokers out at Carroll. I didn't know this guy had gone to Carroll. He used to be in the Smokers at Carroll. He'd get 3 punches at me before I'd get one good one back at him. He says, he's a tough son of a gun. And only different words. And he says, and so he got all excited. He said, why are you talking to him? And I said, well, I got to get this information to Belgium to Archbishop Jadot's uncle, nephew. You know, these guys were all Jadot's boys. And so he wanted to make sure that Jadot's nephew knew about it, because he's at the Louvain and so forth. And so then he says, I used to be at Carroll, and I used to go have breakfast with Dutch every day. And his demeanor changed from like dark to daylight. It was the most amazing thing I've ever seen. It's like the one thing that just dropped out of the sky for him. Remember the Tiger and Dutch. So then he finished his soft-boiled eggs, and I helped him get this big load of stuff out to his four-wheel drive. He had to have been a really big man in his day. And I remember he pulled away, he rolled down the window, and he said, tell Dutch Joe says hi. And then he died 2 days later.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that story, John.
So my name's Carolyn Miller. I am Archbishop Hunthausen's niece. My mom is his baby sister. And I had the honor of spending a lot of time with Dutch and Jack the last several years of their lives. And I became Dutch's person who wrote correspondence for him because he couldn't write. He talked a lot faster than I could write, and Jack would make fun of how sloppy my notes were because it's hard to read, because I kept saying, Dutch, I can't write that fast, you gotta slow down.
And Jack was blind.
Jack was blind. They both were enthralled with technology, especially Dutch, and he was like, take a picture of us on that phone of yours and let me see what it looks like. It just amazes me. I wish I could read because I want to know how this all works. And I said, it just does, Dutch. I don't know how it works, it just does. But Jack would say, I like those satin pajamas, and Dutch would go, they're polyester. And he said, could you order some of those things for me on your phone? I said, sure. I'd order them up, and I'd say, they'll be at my house in 2 days. They're like, this is the coolest thing ever, you know? So I was able to track down some of Dutch's old friends that had written to him, and we weren't quite sure who they were. We held on to the letter for a couple of months, and then Dutch was, I don't know who that is, let's just throw it away. And then he talked to Father Mike, and he says, oh, no, you know that fella, he used to be a priest, and now he's the mayor out of this little city in Oregon. And Dutch was like, can we find him on that phone of yours? And I said, you know, I think I can. My kid always told me I should be a detective. So I get a hold of this guy. I call the city that he's the mayor of, and I say, is so-and-so the mayor? They said, yes, he is. I said, I'm trying to get a hold of him. They said, well, here's his cell phone number. I said, okay. So I called the guy, and I left him a big, long message, and a couple nights later, he called me back. And we set up a time where I would be with Dutch and Jack that he could call, and I put the phone next to Dutch's ear. He was still able to do a lot of things, but to hold a phone up for a long period of time was a struggle. And so I got to be part of those conversations when he's visiting with his gentleman that he had known 40, 50 years ago. And just to see his eyes light up, and you could just see the memories turning in his head. And I'm going to switch out of that conversation and go back to how fortunate my children were to grow up in Helena with Dutch and Jack around. So they always stopped by our house and they'd have dinner with us once in a while. And my kids, for the life of them, couldn't tell the two of them apart. They didn't know who was who. And even when I was little, you know, Dutch would always put some money in his hand and he'd put them out and he'd say, which hand, you know, you'd pick and he'd, split it with the kids and he'd split it with everybody. And so my youngest daughter, who's now 25, was very little, and they were leaving my house, and Jack leaned down and he gave her a dollar bill. And she looks up at him and she holds up a 5 and she said, the other one gave me this. So this daughter of mine has had some issues with her retinas, and it's kind of rare, but she's had several surgeries on her eyes, and Jack knows the value of your vision and your sight. So about a year ago, they wanted to send her a little bit of money to help her with her bills. And so Dutch was drafting this letter to her. And so he said, Dear Mares, I sure hope that your surgeries are going to go well and that your vision is going to come back strong. And this is just a little bit of money to help you with your bills. And then he looked at me and he goes, and I want you to sign it the other one. And so I signed it the other one. But I was just very blessed. And again, Frank, thank you for writing this book. Thank you for honoring Dutch's wishes and not publishing it until after he was gone. As Bill said, Dutch and Jack both spoke, and they both were very, very witty up until a day or two before they died. And to be able to spend that time with them was such an honor. It was just, those are just good memories for all of us. And we did think that we were normal. We were not normal. Even when I met my husband, we've been married almost 35 years, and I talk about all the ski trips that they took us on. That's why we knew how to ski. That's why we went to camp, because they were able to take us those places. And he'd say, well, where did you guys stay? And I'd say, well, we'd stay in the rectory of the church in Bozeman or Whitefish or Butte or wherever you were. And he'd say, really? You slept in church? I'm like, yeah. Pulled out our sleeping bags and we slept in church. He goes, with all these crucifixes around? I'm like, yeah. That's normal for us. And he says, that's not normal. So anyway, they were just wonderful, wonderful men, and I'm so sorry that they're gone, and I miss them horribly. So thank you all for coming. Frank, thank you so much for your writings. I appreciate it.
I don't want to have my back to almost everybody. I'm Bob Robinson, and I've had the opportunity to know the Hunthausen.
Move you over here. He's videoing you there. You don't want to be on TV.
That's actually the better place for me. I'm Bob Robinson, and I've had the opportunity to know Father Jack and the Archbishop all the time growing up here in Helena. Father, in fact.
That's Frank told me to tell you that. Close to you.
Closer? Okay. All right. Father Jack was the principal at Cathedral High, or actually the manager. Sister Patrice, Aunt Patrice, was the principal, but the person sitting right in the end office was Father Jack, and that was a comforting place to go if you had to go to the front office, because he was so understanding and so caring. Had the opportunity also, I think, to be confirmed by Bishop Hunthausen here. But as the family was talking, I was thinking, what influenced that guy? And, obviously he had a wonderful family. The parents, the Hunthausen parents, were just, look what they've done for all of those Hunthausen kids, and then ultimately the grandkids and all. And I got to thinking, this place, Carroll College, had a big influence on both of those priests as well. They were going to school here, participating in athletics, and then going the full gamut of being coaches and teachers. And I think if you read Bob Swarthout's book about Carol. There's some powerful professors up here at the time that those guys were here that influenced them, and they carried that on. And I think they taught people who have continued to carry that on with some of the professors that are even here today. I'd like to make two other comments, and one is I was involved way back when we were building the stadium down here, and both Father Jack and the Archbishop were retired at the time, and I think they were living down in one of the Hunthausen houses down in Sunhaven.
Art's house.
Okay, and in the afternoons, they would come up and take a walk, and they would park over there, kind of down there on the, I'd call it the northeast corner of the stadium, and they'd go all the way around the whole place, follow where the top of the berm is, all the way around, and then on occasion they'd stop and report, on the progress, and they were very excited about the progress. And in fact, they were one of the first purchasers of a booth or a suite up there, and it was purchased so that the kids could come and watch the games together. It was pretty nice. And the last thing I'll say is that I played football with Yo Reinhardt. and he didn't change.
If anyone has questions for Frank as well.
Stories are great.
Hi, I'm Ray Shipman. I'm a great nephew. I'm named after Dutch. I'm on the Sturgar side. I just have a couple memories to share. I was so lucky to grow up hanging out with Dutch and Jack at Moose Lake in the summer times. And I loved the outdoors, I still do. And we used to build forts, me and my two younger sisters, and just mess around. We were building these fishing poles one time, just out of sticks and string and safety pins and whatnot. We were young. But I remember one time I'm out fishing on the dock, and Dutch comes down. He's like, "What are you doing?" I've got this stick and a white string, and I'm just a little kid. And he's like, "Run up there and find a better fishing pole." And so I'm looking around, and there's all these old fishing poles hanging on one of the sides of the cabin, and they're all either missing the reel or the line, or And so, and this is just Dutch. He just was always so giving, and he goes, "Well, run into my bedroom and look behind the door, and I think there's a silver tube, and bring that out there." And I'm just a little kid, and I'm like, "Oh, what do you want me to do this for?" And I bring it out, and he opens it up, and it's his old fly rod, and he's like, "Well, here, this is for you now. Learn how to use it." I was just a little kid, and so there was that, and I grew up sitting in his lap, and he'd teach me how to make willow whistles. And every time we were up there, whether I was making whistles or I had to gut the fish that I did end up catching, he'd always help me. But he'd say, "Well, you got to have a knife." And every time I don't know how he had so many pocket knives, but he had a lot. And his dresser drawer was just full of them. And every time he'd just go say, "Well, go grab a pocket knife." And then he'd help me, and he'd teach me how to make the whistle or how to gut the fish. And then he'd say, "Okay, now keep the knife." I don't know where all the knives have gone, but I have a lot of them somewhere. And then another memory, and this kind of goes back to the book from his childhood. I was up at Moose Lake one time, and we have kind of the front lawn out in front. And Aunt Cindy Sturgar we had these, she bought these rugs, these like indoor-outdoor rugs. And they came on these long, thick cardboard tubes. I was probably 10 years old. And I was out in the front lawn pole vaulting because I was a 10-year-old and I had a long cardboard tube. And Dutch and Jack were sitting in their spot, which was right in the front of the cabin where they watched the sunrise. And I was out there just messing around, gonna get hurt. And Dutch kind of got stern with me, said, "Raymond, come over here." I was like, "What?" He goes, "I have to tell you a story." And if you haven't read the book, when Dutch was young, he was doing something similar, except he fell over and got knocked out, and everyone yelled that he was dead. And they had to lay him in his grandpa's brewery on the conveyor belt until he woke up. So he said, "Now that's why you can't be pole vaulting in the front lawn." And I guess just my last thing, as far as Dutch's his legacy, he was the first Hunthausen to come to Carroll College way a long time ago. In the fall, it'll be 80 years of Hunthausen's, but I'm a Carroll student, and so it's just been such an honor to be a part of that long history and legacy of the family being here and having the new Hunthausen Activity Center, and just, you know, feeling, you know, so welcome in this family. So thanks.
Andy.
Yes.
Let me say something. I don't do this.
My name is Bill Pena, and I have a wonderful association and the honor and such a privilege to be able to be and listen to all of you. I got to know Dutch because I got to work and play and pray and do a lot of things with the Hunthausen family, the Sturgar family, the Walsh family, and the list goes on and on. It's also a student at Carroll College here, graduated. And but anyway, I got to know Dutch on a couple of different occasions here. A lot of it is because of all of you, because you gave me opportunities to meet with him and everything, and then just as I've seen over the years and everything, I mean, you guys still walk the talk. You guys still do the things and everything that remind me so much of him, then too. But anyway, when I was married and while I was working at Legendary Lodge then too, and my children would come to the camp a lot. And oftentimes they would be there when Dutch and the family were there then too. But you know, he always treated my family like they were a part of all your families and everything then too. And they remember the Archbishop for that reason then too, because he didn't distinguish. He didn't, you know, say this is a Hunthausen or a Sturgarden. He just treated everybody the same. And I remember him holding my children. And to this day, that still was burning my family. You know, and you mentioned the drawer. It's interesting. I got to take a couple of Hunthausens out to Seattle on a couple of occasions there, and we would stay at where he was at and everything like that, and they'd go for the drawer. It's sort of like a lyric to a song after a while. I think about this, but anyway, but it was awesome out there because he used to just welcome everybody and everything like that. A little bit older than Bill there too. And anyway, as far as the book goes and everything, I was aware a bit of what was going on, but again, it was more of something. And whenever I was around with him or the family was all together and everything like that, you never thought that he ever had anything else going on in his life except for the family and the folks that were around him then too. So anyway, thank you for just giving me this opportunity to. Thank you very much.
That's Buck. And if people don't know about the drawer was for the whale. For one period, Dutch would put all his change every day into the drawer of the whale, and then a niece or nephew would get to clean it out if you were there at the right time. You want to go next?
I don't know if I want to go at all. This is one for you. It should have been in the book. My name is Kurt Chisholm, and I was studying to be a priest at one time. I was scared the heck out of a lot of people. Thinking about going to confession of Father Kurt. Anyway, I was assigned, after I graduated from Carroll, I was assigned to Mount St. Bernard Seminary in Dubuque, Iowa. And we had a great tradition of Montana guys going through there. Priests like Joe Pat Sullivan and Father Peoples and Mike Miles and Father Lowney, Bill Lowney. Who else? And Father Haffey, guys like that were back there. Anyway, we lived in the seminary, which is owned and operated by the Archdiocese of Iowa, of which there were 4 dioceses. Most of the seminaries, of course, were from Iowa. They have been professional seminarians probably since the 8th grade, a lot of them in high school. And these Montana guys were kind of looked upon as strange people because we came out of Carroll College. Most of them, you know, came out of Borrowville Hall, but normal people for the most part. On occasion, the bishops of the diocese, or the archdiocese, would come to visit their seminarians, and that was a big deal. And we lived kind of a monastic life, even though across the field was where we went to our theology classes taught by the Dominicans, very progressive, solid, intellectual, bright guys. But we lived under the thumb of the diocesan priests in the diocese. Anyway, the bishops had come to visit, and that was a very formal occasion. the bishop from the archdiocese, or from the Diocese of Des Moines would come up, and he wanted to see all the Des Moines seminarians. And so they were all told to wear their nicely laundered surplice, and they'd meet with the bishop and the rector in his office, and they came in and kissed his ring and then sat down in a chair, and the bishop would get behind the desk and say, "My son, how are things going?" "Oh, fine." Well, one day we got the word that Bishop Hunthausen was coming to see the Montana guys. And he attended breakfast just like the other bishops did, and we were all in silence, saying our prayers in Latin. And then after breakfast, respectfully, our bishop asked the rector if he could meet with his seminarians privately and not in the office. And I know that set the rector back because that wasn't according to the rules, but he got his way. And he came down to a room, it was kind of like a lounge, and he mingled among some of the other seminarians there. They didn't know whether to genuflect in front of him or kiss his ring, but they all shook his hand. They were just happy to meet him. I happened to be standing next to him with my coat on, so he said, "Kurt, let's start with you." And he spent an hour walking around the grounds, talking to me, and asking how things really were going, and I was able to tell him. And I never forgot that, and then subsequently did the same thing for the rest of us. And that was part of his reform, his disarming spirit, in my opinion, because there was this stated, terrible, formal tradition there at the seminary that he kind of upended, but he did it respectfully and prayerfully and with a lot of dignity. The next day, I think there were 20 guys from Iowa that wanted to sign up for this diocese. But that's my reflection of my bishop.
My name is Chris Fuller. I've had the pleasure of being the director of the Hunthausen Center for Peace and Justice over the last 10 years. And actually, I have a story for the family. I don't know if you've heard this story. So Carol has several connections to the Second Vatican Council. The Bishop Hunthausen at the time, who was there, but also a young seminarian by the name of Jeremiah Sullivan, who was also there. And I'm remembering my version of the stories as Father Sullivan has told it to me. He was there at the opening day of the council, standing outside the door as the procession began. And he had a camera. And a Vatican official asked him if he wanted to go in. He said he didn't have a ticket, and the Vatican official said, "Now you do." And so Carol has an archive of photos of the opening of the council from inside St. Peter's Basilica, taken by this young seminarian. There's a story that Father Sullivan told me about the bishop at the opening ceremony. So you learn when you move here to Montana that many people from Butte and Anaconda have nicknames, Dutch, and so on. And Sullivan's was Sully. That's what the Archbishop used to call him, was Sully. So Father Sullivan, a few years ago, I was visiting him here when he was at, where was he at the restaurant? Touchmark, when he was here at Touchmark. And we were talking about the council, and he told me the story that he was inside St. Peter's, he was watching, and the Archbishop was way at the end. He was the youngest, one of the youngest bishops, way at the end of the line. He was watching the bishops come in, and he was looking for Bishop Hunthausen to come in. And suddenly, he was standing on the side, and suddenly he came in, and the line would stop occasionally. They'd get up in their seats and stop. And he saw the bishop, but he didn't think the bishop could see him. And all of a sudden, you heard, "How's it going, Sully?" And it was Bishop Hunthausen. We saw him out of the corner of his eye as he entered St. Peter's Basilica.
My name is John Reese, and I teach here in the theology department. Actually, Chris, I, and Elvira all moved to Helena 15 years ago. And I know I myself knew of the Archbishop, more knew about him before I came here. I had studied theology in a number of different places, including Louvain as an example. And I had an experience that I think it's worth relating here at Carroll. So in, I want to say, 2012, the theology department put on a lecture series about the 50th anniversary of Vatican II. And we, all of us partook in it, and talking about some different aspects of the council. And we brought a historian in from Louvain, who was a historian of the Second Vatican Council itself. And he came here in part because he got to meet Archbishop Hunthausen. Sorry. And so what happened was they were on, what do they call it? Is it Presbyteral Retreat over at outside of Butte? What's the spa there that they do that at?
Oh, yeah.
Is it Fairmont, right, at Fairmont. So we went out there, so I took this professor from Louvain out there, and I got to witness a really interesting conversation of a historian, sorry, and I'll say a bishop. And it was such a funny conversation because, so here's this historian, he's got all of his notes, he's been studying this for years, he goes down to the Vatican and does this, that, the other thing, etc. And at the time, Archbishop Hunthausen was, I think, the last surviving member, certainly the last surviving member of all 4 sessions from the United States. And as they were talking, it was this really interesting conversation of Archbishop would be reaching for a name and the historian would tell him the name, right? You know, and it was just this really interesting conversation about what took place at this event. Both the background, you know, because we all forget the messy post-World War II times in Europe, right? The nuclear arms race had started long before it got to Puget Sound. I mean, to be realistic, in Europe at the time of the Second Vatican Council. And so to hear these two talk, and I remember Archbishop Hunthausen, the way he spoke about what took place at Vatican II and how he tried to live that out when he came back here, first to Montana and then out to Seattle. It was a really powerful image. And I remember sitting there thinking, this guy is a bishop's bishop. And I think that's an important element. Obviously, I can't tell the stories of family, et cetera, but I think that kind of a spirit is a spirit that's been here at Carroll, and a number of people, both in his teachers and some of the people that followed him, in the eventual setting up of the Archbishop Hunthausen Center here on campus, et cetera. But that ability to be able to, in a very, very human, humble way, as you all say, but to be able to speak it. And people would go along with him. He didn't do this against people's will. He brought the best out of the people around him. And I think that's a really, really powerful experience that, for me, is very, very helpful to remember.
Anyone else? Say anything? Ask a question of Frank.
Bill, you have a point.
Oh, I just wanted to say that, you know, that Kurt, you scared us half to death when you were like lily pad man of the legendary. He was in the seminary at that time. He was on his way out, I'm sure. I was a camper then. Anyway, it took me back to, yeah, so wonderful. I mean, I couldn't even look straight out at you the whole time thinking about Dutch, and it's just so emotional to me, but there's just so many more stories. And it just, I mean, I remember the baseball glove I still have when I was 11 years old. He bought it for me, you know, 11-year-old birthday. And that was, you know, those kind of out of the house at the birthday. And that was just, those are just small memories, but that's just who he was. Just absolutely amazing. And so if we can be half of what he was, still is. Like I say, here's what he is. When I was awake for an hour, not sleeping, thinking about him and just what I might say here, and I thought, wow, just float. And I was totally at peace. The shoulder that I'm going to physical therapy for tomorrow just wasn't aching anymore at that time. And it didn't, like one of those things when you watch a scary movie at the very end of the night. No, this is like, wow, that's Dutch. So he just puts you even in his death, you know. So pretty amazing.
So we probably have to close things up, but I just want people to know that this whole time you've been pretty much surrounded. So everyone who's a Hunthausen or part of the clan, raise your hand. You've been surrounded the whole time. Scary. Frank, it's yours.
Well, let me express truly from the core of my being and the bottom of my heart, and with Bridget, my beloved, here with me, and I have to say that the opportunity to listen to all these genuinely heartfelt sharings, it's a true privilege. It's been a true honor and a great privilege to be able to work to try to do something that could never, ever, at least did I feel that I could ever even begin to achieve something that could do justice to who Archbishop Raymond Gerhard Hunthausen is for the world, for religion, for society, for his beloved family. I want to mention two little practical things about the remaining books. I'd like to recognize a Carol student. Danny, could you please come out from the table? Please. Danny, yeah, welcome, Danny. I just met Danny, of course, beforehand, and I asked her, how do you pronounce your last name?
Marietti.
So Danny Marietti is here staffing the Saints shop, you know, the bookstore here, right? And so thank you for doing that. And you have a few more books over there?
I got 5.
You got 5 more. So anyway, I want to thank you for that. And let's see, you had mentioned to me that why don't you go ahead and use the mic and tell folks that what we talked about? Yeah. Okay.
So if there's an interest for more books, and if I sell out, the bookstore will order more books for you. You could just leave your name and the contact information, and we'll let you know when those books come back in. Yeah.
Thank you. And that's an important point that she's making, because, of course, that means, right, that the Carroll College bookstore would be one of the go-to places here in Helena. I suspect it won't be the only. I'm speaking with one of you earlier about another bookstore that maybe will soon have the book, but definitely a place to go to get to order the books, right? To get the additional, especially other folks you're thinking of that might like to get this book. So one other thing about another practical, very important point I wanted to add is that all the proceeds from the sale of the book, beyond whatever the expenditures are for the publisher, and this is mentioned in the book, all those proceeds will go to the Ground Zero community, which is the educational arm of the Ground Zero Center for Nonviolent Action, which was founded just a stone's throw, really across the gate. I've been there, actually spent some of the time doing the research on the book right there. Very moving experience. I was studying FBI files there and CIA files. Matter of fact, on Good Friday just a few years ago, so it was an incredible experience for me personally to be there. Same place. Incidentally, the cover of the book, somebody hold one up, please. The cover of this book, you all have it, but yeah, so it's a tremendously important picture. It is Raymond Hunthausen at the Bangor base on a Good Friday pilgrimage that the Ground Zero Center community organized. It was actually April 1st, Good Friday, 1988. And I had the honor of being there with him and with all the hundreds of people, including little Janet Duffel, who's the person holding that cross. It's mentioned and described in the inside cover of the book. So the Ground Zero Center for Nonviolent Action will be the recipient of any profits of the book. That's another good reason to get in your order with the Saints shop for additional copies of the book. It was Father Ed Hislop at Blessed Trinity in Missoula a couple of days ago at the beautiful, the tremendous liturgy. It just definitely has the shared responsibility spirit of the Second Vatican Council, and Dutch Hunthausen, and everybody else, all the women and men that made the spirit of the council come alive for so many years. And he definitely, at the gathering there, Father Ed Islop said to everybody, actually he said it during the Mass, he said, you know, you got to get a couple more copies of this book as a Christmas present. And then there was a pause, and he said, make a great Easter gift. And when you stop and think about that, in many ways, this is a passion narrative. And so in some ways, the story is really one that Dr. King famously once said, and I've been deeply influenced by Martin Luther King Jr.'s notion that, you know, we lived through Good Friday, but Dr. King once said, Good Friday must give way to Easter. Good Friday give way to Easter. It gives the way to Easter. And of course, if you want us to sign the books that remain, or wherever, we'll be happy to do that. I have to say, every time I sign it, I think this is a little silly, because it should be Dutch Hunthausen signing the book. But at least I feel honored to be able to sign it, thinking that it's a little bit of a spirit of a great, noble person that I can try to convey. I want to turn to the postscript as a closing. Can we do this as a prayer, I guess? Because I feel like the whole book is a prayer, if it's anything. And so I'm going to just close with this. And I would like to thank, before I do so, it's a postscript. At the very end of the book, on the left-hand side of the page, is the Governor's Proclamation. Governor Steve Bullock recognizing the significance of this person here in Montana. And on the right-hand side, on what is called page 471, is the postscript. I want to read it, but I want to thank John. Thank you very much, President Sec. Your own spouse, Met Victoria. Thank you very much, the two of you. And the whole committee here at Carroll. And I have to say a special thank you, because Bridget and I are heading to Anaconda tomorrow morning. The Anaconda Catholic Community will have to share there, right? I think Jean Sturgar will be there, the youngest of the siblings that have been so central in the story here. Yeah, so that's where we're heading out tomorrow morning. But I really want to thank these four people next to me here, yeah, and every one of you. I've really been moved by you, and I've learned a lot from you, and you really do, all of you. Everybody here, I'm sure, in your own way, because I could tell by the way all were sharing the different stories you just told. You've been deeply inspired, live in the spirit of, as you were all saying, right? Family here, not only Raymond, not only Dutch, but all the siblings and their spouses. So can we just, before I read this, can we just, I mean, you all feel it anyway, but one more deep felt applause and gratitude to this wonderful family. Yeah, could you do that? I don't know, applause don't even begin to convey what we all feel, but thank you so much for the sharing tonight, you all. So the postscript. As I pen this brief postscript, it is the morning after learning that Raymond Dutch Hunthausen had passed away. With his death on Sunday afternoon, July 22, 2018, his life journey brought him within 1 month of what would have been his 97th birthday, the 21st of August. During the last years of his life, he grounded his integrity and accepted his frailty and fragility with a vigorous and seasoned spirituality. As I learned all through the process of working on this book, it is Dutch's spirit which disarms us. I tried to convey the conscience and courage which guided this humble giant. Yet his conscience and courage were guided by his character. And his character, in turn, was guided by what he believed to be a spirit of unconditional love at the heart of the cosmos. I have tried to capture the essence of his true character. If I have done so, It is because of all the people along the way, many cited in this book, who have shared their experiences knowing him. Even his fierce critics have, perhaps unwittingly in some cases, helped us to better appreciate the nobility, the tenacity of his witness for peace and justice. In this present moment, as we reflect on how our own personal lives relate to large social history and to the social forces and injustices all around us, what could be more important for us than to look for guidance in how to become a better person, how to shape a better society, how to foster a better religion. Dutch Hunthausen, who loved the great natural outdoors and who walked a kind of metaphorical path of prophetic peace. He can be a guide on a long and a demanding mountain trail. We can hear him speaking to us in a gentle voice. Our security is in a loving, caring God. We must dismantle our weapons of terror and place our reliance on God. And can I hear the people say, Amen. Thank you.